Harvard Divinity School.
Seeing Prophetically, Social Movements and Moral Discernment, April 13th, 2026.
Welcome to Seeing Prophetically, Social Movements and Moral Discernment. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining us in what I know will be a rich and engaging conversation. And especially thank you to Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas. Your words were so moving. I was especially touched by, we are called not to paralysis, but to movement. And I hope that this panel will give us that call to action to how to translate womanist theory into political action. So our panel today invites us to think seriously about what it means to see prophetically. In many religious traditions, prophecy is not simply about predicting the future. It is about telling the truth in the present. It is about recognizing suffering that others ignore, naming systems that disrupt our common flourishing, and imagining possibilities beyond what the world tells us is realistic. To see prophetically is to develop courage to discern where God, justice, and liberation are moving in history, and then to respond. This conversation is especially rooted in the insights of Black feminists and womanist thoughts, traditions that have long insisted that experiences, knowledge, and leadership of Black women are indispensable to moral vision. We hope today's conversation reminds us that scholarship and activism are not separate worlds, that ideas shape movements, and movements generate new ideas. The classroom, the church, the streets, and the policy arena are all sites of theological and ethical production. So we'll devote the first 45 minutes to a panel discussion of theology, activism, and policy, and then we'll open up the last 10 to 15 minutes for audience questions and answers. So with that, I will introduce our esteemed panelists. Dr. Brittany Cooper is a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies and Africana studies at Rutgers. She is the founder and principal investigator of the Rutgers Rage Lab. Dr. Cooper is the author of several books, including the award-winning Beyond Respectability, The Intellectual Thought of Race Women, and the New York Times bestseller, Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower. Dr. Cooper is also a public scholar who has written or given commentary in a range of media outlets, including MSNBC, NPR, Time Magazine, The Daily Show, and many more. She delivered a 2016 TED Talk that has over 1 million views, and she's the co-founder of the Crunk Feminist Collective and publishes occasional essays on their Substack newsletter, The Remix. Thank you for being here, Dr. Cooper. Dr. Melaine Price is the inaugural director of the Ruth J. Simmons Center for Race and Justice at her alma mater, Prairie View A&M University in Texas. Dr. Price is an endowed professor of political science and serves as the principal investigator for the African American Studies Initiative and the HBCU Student Voting Rights Lab. Price is the author of 2 books, The Race Whisperer, Barack Obama and the Political Use of Race, that sounds very interesting, and Dreaming Blackness, Black Nationalism and African American Public Opinion. She is currently working on her 3rd book project, The Marching Storm, Prairie View A&M University and the Quest for Student Voter Access, written on the 5-decade history of voting rights activism at Prairie View. She also served as a special assistant to Ruth J. Simmons in her last year as president of Prairie View. Dr. Price has served as a consultant and commentator for various national and local news outlets and the audio tour of 2 major exhibits at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. In her free time, Melaine is a supporter of all things Black in Houston and is an intrepid gardener. Thank you for being here. Oh, Melanie. Oh, apologies. Thank you for being here, Dr. Price. No, I appreciate you. All right, and finally, Reverend Tracy Blockman is a nationally recognized Blackman. Yeah? Okay. Y'all gotta correct me. Don't have me up here looking crazy. Reverend Tracy Blockman is a nationally recognized public theologian whose ministry lives at the intersection of faith, public witness, and collective action. She is a pastor who believes the gospel must be lived out loud in the church, on the streets, in the halls of power, and wherever human dignity is at stake. Amen. Today, she serves the church as a movement strategist and organizational consultant, advancing justice-centered, faith-rooted change. She is a founder and CEO of Hope Builds, a faith-based consultancy, co-founder of the Prophetic Convening, a collaborative space for moral imagination, and lead catalyst for Faith Out Loud, an emergent justice strategy hub committed to embodied discipleship, narrative change, and sustained organizing across religious, political, and cultural barriers. We are in for such a treat. Thank you so much for being here, Reverend Blackman. I'd like to begin with a broad framing question for all of you, and we can just go straight down the line. If we take seriously the idea that God is revealed in history and struggle, then what might today's movements be trying to teach us about the divine, and are we paying attention?
Good morning. Thank you for the very warm welcome. Thank you, Dr. Brown Douglas. You are canonical for me and have been since I was a young scholar, and so it's a real treat to get to hear you this morning. And thank you to Dean Marla Frederick, just for being awesome and being a beacon in this moment of Black women's leadership possibility, an ethical commitment to making sure that students have a place to imagine and prepare themselves to build a new world. It's interesting being both a Black feminist and a gender studies professor, because in the secular academy, talking about what you think God is doing in the world is not really what we do. And in fact, one often has to defend what it means to continue to be a person of faith, in places where, both because of an overarching belief in secularism, but also because of the way that religion has been weaponized against the vulnerable. Folks think that part of what it means to be really smart is that you don't have any kind of belief system in anything, except for that that's not true, right? Because secularism is a belief system. And so the way that I have said this to my students and the way that I try to think about it, number one, I have learned not to let academic disciplines or movements co-opt the things that the folks who raised me helped me to understand about the world. And I just come from people who were like, Jesus will make a way. And in my experience, Jesus has made a way. And I'm saying that because sometimes it is very basic in that way, that folks want you to disavow the things that you know to be true about your own experience in order to conform to their sort of epistemic account of experience. And one does not have to concede their point of view in order to have the right to be in the room. But what I think that means, and what I say to my students is, if you want to change the world and we have not yet managed to change it in the ways that you want, and you think that we can change it, that means you have faith, right? Changing the world is a faith proposition. The belief you have that a different world is possible is a faith proposition. And I came up being raised by people who believed a different world was possible every single time they showed up on a Sunday morning after being disrespected all through the week, saying that another world was possible. And every time my grandmother gave me $20 when I came home from college to say, I believe in what you're doing, even though I've never been where you've been and I can't see it and I don't understand it, but I believe in you. Those are faith propositions that our people put their work behind. And I'm saying that because part of what I think that movements are trying to teach us about God's work in the world, I think God is on the side of the movers. I think God is on the side and with the people who are saying, I had a different intention for this than what some of you have made of it. And I'm with the people who are trying to make the best of God's intentions real in the world, the most inclusive of God's intentions, the most just, the most truthful, right? The ones that instill an ethic of care. And I think that the way to get to that, however, is to recognize that, faith. So for me, the other reason you need the divine is because I think that that's the critical remainder between human effort and otherwise possibility. And I think that what I hope young people come to understand is that for so many of us, the divine has been the difference between all the things white people said we could have, or capitalism said we could have, or men said we could have, and what we've actually been able to have. And if we only listened to what those systems said, we would never have become these things. And the place that I heard that first, for example, is in church. that I was somebody, that God cared for me, that if I did right and I tried to stay in good stead, that there were things that were possible for me. And I have lived into the possibility of that. And I think movements amplify that kind of thinking at scale when they're doing their best work.
Well, thank you for this question. And I won't do the honorifics again, but ditto.
Ditto for all of us. Same.
Ditto. I think your question already begins to examine a revealing God. The question itself presumes a God that is not bound or held hostage by the text, a God that moves through present day times and with present people. And I would say that I'll name 3 ways that that manifestation is made real for me. One of the things I would say that God says to this time is that God is still on the side of the oppressed. Whether you take that oppressed from Scripture, when we talk about Moses' call story, which I refer to as God's call story and not Moses' call story, when God is asked why God is there, God says, I am present because I heard the cries of the people. God doesn't say, I heard Moses or I was looking for Moses. God says it is the pain of the people that calls God's presence to be in the burning bush. And even if you go from there to God being present in the Israelites' experience in Egypt and on their way out, to being present in the experience of the transatlantic slave trade, as horrific as it was, to being present in chattel slavery, to being present in the exodus from chattel slavery that could have only been possible by God, to being present in Jim and Jane Crow, and to now being present in the continued oppression of people of color, of all colors, outside of whiteness, and this illusion that whiteness is most closely related to what it means to be God. So God is present still with those who are oppressed. In addition to that, I would say that God is also requiring participation of those that God is present with. And so we see in all of these liberative movements that God does not do it for us, God does it with us. God does those pieces that we can't do without God, but God definitely expects our participation. And we see that scripturally, and we see that in all the movements that I've talked about. It wasn't just some miraculous, mysterious, magical thing happening. It was with the participation of people. The last thing I would say about that, and because they're the scholars, I wrote notes. God also demands that faith be made visible through our actions, that this is not a secretive process. You might not be able to explain it, but the fact that it can't be explained is the witness of God. And so I would say that this is how that revelation begins to happen for us, that the text does not limit God, but expands with God as we expand, as creation expands, as opportunities expand. God is never a was, God is always is. Therefore, whatever is happening in this moment, how it's happening, God shows up in its midst.
I'm going to say amen to all of that and then mention that I'm not a reverend doctor anything. So I've been spending a lot of time really looking in the past to try to understand what's happening now and where we go next, and not in the glorious past. But I've been spending a lot of time trying to think about what happened right before glory, right? What happened right before the civil rights movement? What happened right before a thing happened? And trying to understand, because I believe that that is where we're going to get the answers of what I should be doing now, right? And I'm going to point you to 2 things that sit with me most often because they are the things that have been my guiding light. And the first is Joanne Robinson. I teach at a historically Black college, and I want to know when the kids start moving, what is my job to do? Because I'm not a kid. So when y'all walk them 5 miles, I'm gonna meet y'all on the other side of that in my car. But when I get there, I want to know what I'm supposed to have, what y'all need, what are the things, like what are the things that I can provide that Joanne Robinson provided to the Montgomery bus boycott, and how she did that at a historically Black college in the where she could have easily lost her job, because I'm in that moment right now. And so I want to invite you to start not looking at the icons, not looking at the heroes, but looking at what happened right before them, because I think that is going to give us the most important information. And the second thing is an article that Brittany knows. Me and my friend Shatima, we worship this article, and that is Negotiating and Transforming the Public Sphere by Elsa Barkley Brown. That there's so much good stuff in that article. But what is most important to me is that it is an article that starts with a story of Black women who are trying to regain their power in the church. And so you learn immediately that they once had power and now that power has been taken. And I think in many ways that story helps us because, for one, it tells us so much about what people were doing at emancipation. And even if you just say, oh, it was emancipation in Richmond, it was emancipation somewhere. And so what free people were thinking once they moved from theory to practice, right? And how that practice can be corrupted if we're not careful and in a very short amount of time. And so for me, I'm trying to say, like, the thing, I wrote it down because I thought it was smart what I thought. I thought it was smart, so I'm gonna share it with you too. If you don't think it's smart, pretend. Okay. I wrote down, because this is important to know, because Black women have the ability to hold in tension the past, present, and future. They are never given the luxury of forgetting the past. They are never allowed to delude themselves about the present, and they always have to provision for the future. And so when you look at what Joanne Robinson was doing, that is the exact thing that you see. She understands what's happening. She knows what has happened in the past, but she is also making a way for the future. And so I am trying to figure out how to remember what happened in the past, to be clear-eyed about what has happened in the present, but to know that I have to provide for the future that I'm in charge of stewarding. And so that's what I think when I think about movements.
That's very thoughtful. Thank you. And hey, somebody's got to drive that car, you know? Hey, we need to save space on the other side.
Some of them gonna want to ride back. This is what I've learned from these protests.
Yeah, that'd be me. And this is great. I actually want to start with you with this next question, Dr. Price, because I am curious about the gap between theory and movement. Myself, I have a background in political campaigns before coming here to HDS, and so that's the experience I take into the classroom. And so for you, especially being a professor and being a part of supporting these students in their movements, is there a gap between Black womanist or Black feminist theory and movement practice? And if so, where do we see it most clearly? And would love all perspectives.
Look, I think innately there is the gap. I think we're often told that you have to separate all of these things, right? In the same way that we're told, you have to code switch, in the same way that we're told these things. But I have found that the best kinds of movements are when you can help people from their own, when you can help mobilize people from their own experience. And one of the primary experiences, at least of the students that I come across who are almost all Black, is you can start with an example of the church, which is why I start my Black politics class with that Elsa Barkley Brown article, right? Because I'm like, hey, they have all been to a meeting at church, most of them. Some of y'all. Apparently some churches don't have meetings. This is what I'm learning this young. I'm old now, and I'm learning that some people just have despots at the top. But I was raised at a Baptist church where the business meeting was the best day of the entire year for children. Because grown-ups showed their entire ass at the church. And you'd be like, what? This is the best. But anyway, so now I have to explain that part. Anyway, it's longer. But I say that because there is a way in which I am also in the student body population that I'm dealing with, that I'm teaching now, which is 70% first gen, over 70% Pell Grant eligible. There is a real fear that anything they do there is going to separate them from their experience, right? That is, they will be educated out of their families, they will be educated out of their church, they will be educated out of their communities. And so I work very hard to say that your experience in those communities still has value, even in this space, because otherwise then people in their communities start to see college as a place where you lose your children, right? And so part of the job, I think, of good educators is to start with people where they are and bring them to the place you need them to be, rather than to start at a place and tell them catch up or don't, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question. I just started rambling at some point. But
No, it answered my question. It's important to bring our outside experiences into the classroom because they inform each other. And I'm curious if you've seen the same thing, Reverend Blackman in the church, how theory impacts the way that people are moving. Especially, I know that you're involved in the protest after the Ferguson murder. Can you talk about that and about how theory influenced the way that you built coalitions and the way that you galvanized people to action?
Thank you for that question. I think a gap does exist, and not just in the academy, it also exists in church. There's a gap in language. I want to start there, but there's also a gap in leadership understanding and a gap in care. So I'm going to talk about those three. In language, it can be, it is not always the case, but it can be that the language of the academy is distant from the language on the ground.
Yeah.
And if we don't take the time to unpack the language, there's a disconnect in communication. The same is true if you're preaching from the pulpit in language that is inaccessible to the people that you're preaching to. And sometimes we do that because it feels mysterious and it feels scholarly and super anointed or elitist, for lack of a better term. But if the people you are speaking to cannot understand you, then you have failed at your assignment. And so, as a preacher, when I mentor ministers that came to work with me when I was a congregational pastor, I would share with them that we love, especially in Black preaching, to declare how can they hear unless someone is preaching. But the emphasis on that text shouldn't be on the preaching part, it should be on the hearing part. And they can't hear if they can't understand you. So speak in a language. I'm not saying dumb yourself down, but either speak in a language that is spoken in the streets. A Pentecost is coming, practice then. Or take the time to teach in a way that people are learning new languages. Does that make sense? It's very important. I would say, so there's a gap there sometimes between what you see in the books and how people interpret that in the streets. It doesn't have to be, but there is. I also wrote down leadership when I thought about this question, because womanist and Black feminist theory insist on centering Black women, and that's very important, but it's not always lived out in movement work, and it's not always lived out in the church. And I'm thinking about, I was just listening to one of my mentors, Reverend Marsha Woodard. She preached a sermon recently called Thread Pullers. And that's what I hear you talking about, are thread pullers. She talked about how often Black women have been the thread pullers in our movements and have gone unnamed in text, have gone unnamed in history books, have gone unnamed in our testimonies about the story. And she began to name all of these thread pullers. She named the person in the Montgomery bus boycott, and I can't remember her name right now, but she named this woman who was a part of that movement that we know was started by the women. It wasn't started by King, but she talked about this particular woman because she was the cook in the neighborhood. And she figured out that during this Montgomery bus boycott, it might surprise us that they didn't have McDonald's and Burger King and drive-throughs. And she knew that when they started having these meetings, people were going to be hungry. So she took money from her house cleaning job and bought resources to make sandwiches and make plates, and then other women started helping her, and they would sell these at the meetings, right? And then they would take some money, buy more so they could make more, but ultimately they were fueling the meeting through the money that they were making selling these sandwiches. And what she said about that was that people would say, "Where are you getting this money from?" And she would say, "From nowhere." And it became the Nowhere Club, because if they had revealed how they were getting the money, they would have lost their jobs. And she lost her job, but her story is lost. Or the fact that, Harriet Scott, Dred Scott's wife, was the one who had the stronger case, who took us to this place of knowing about the Dred Scott decision, but somehow her name got dropped and we just talk about Dred, right? So all these thread pullers are in these stories, and it's important that we try to align what we talk about around centering Black women to the actual experience of Black women who are in movement space, who are still being left out of the story, left out of the narrative. The last thing I'll say is about care, because I experience womanist theology as being one about also self-care and taking care of oneself while you're doing this work. But too often the case is that's not the case on the ground, that women are still overworking, they're still running our bodies in the ground, we're still not saying no even when we have enough. We are still being the workhorses of movement work. And I think that that is a gap between what we aspire to through our intellect and through our study and what we're actually seeing on the ground. And I will confess that that's definitely a place that I'm trying to grow. I work too hard, I work too long, and I work for little appreciation of that with great expectation that I do it. And that expectation is also embedded in me from the women who trained me and who taught me. And I watched my mother do it and my grandmother do it. And so, when do we break this cycle?
No, absolutely. And I'll kick it to you, Dr. Cooper, to answer this question as well. Do you also see a gap between womanist theory and practice, especially, as being in the business of knowledge production yourself in the classroom and writing? Where do you find the gap?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's happening in two ways. So, number one, I think that when we think about what we mean when we say do theory production in the classroom, I have found that as we produce more and more generations of academics, that they are enamored with the fancy language of Black feminist theory. And to be clear, because I always have to say it, because I'm a Black feminist who is in great allyship with womanist, but who does see a distinction in the things that I do. And some of that has to do with the institutional context that produce these different frameworks, right? And that's important because people will be like, Brittany Cooper's a womanist. Now, don't say that. That's not how I identify. But part of the thing that's important, I would say, people love to use the language of Black feminism and womanism, but they don't actually love Black women. People love the labor, the intellectual and theoretical labor of these frameworks. And here's the thing, sometimes it's Black women doing that. There's certainly an increasing group of Black men who do this, right? Who use the language of the frameworks that Black women have built and then weaponize that language and those frameworks against Black women. It's not just enough to be able to talk about intersectionality. It's not just enough to be able to talk about double jeopardy or simultaneity of oppressions or to have a critique of Black nationalism when you're still treating Black women like trash, when you're not ceding power to them, when you're not doing the emotional labor that is required by many of these frameworks and ways of thinking. when you don't have an understanding of the precarity that Black women are in institutional context. And let me say that sometimes I have seen in academic spaces, sometimes it's our students who miss this, right? Here's one of the gaps between language and practice, between theory and practice, is to remember that Black feminism and womanism as academic frameworks are world building frameworks about the otherwise possibilities that we're trying to get to. But that doesn't mean when you arrive at the institution that is legitimately colonial, that the Black women who are there have managed to work magic and make all of the problems in that institution go away. They are often negotiating power structures that you can never see, having fights and meetings that you will never understand, and you are thinking about the one thing you want them to say, do, to index that you believe, that they're with you. And it's like, here's the thing, sometimes they can't publicly say they with you, but they just came out of a meeting giving somebody hell on your behalf, right? And so that is a way, right, that the theory and the practice don't actually line up. And some of what I think is a problem is folks don't recognize that it was never just meant to be theoretical. Black women didn't show up in the academy and say, we want to do theory. Black women were like, we have Black people to save. We got to make sure these kids get in school, right? So, for example, the other way that I think this shows up then is one of my good friends, Salome Shatila, said to me one time, I was like, she said, use theory, don't let theory use you. Right? And that has been a guiding light for me, because there is a way that in order to sound smart, the academy will make you think that your theory production has to look a certain way, and you will be out here coming up with frameworks and doing kinds of work that actually do harm to our people, right? That actually don't empower them to meet the conditions that they actually face. Let me give you one example. It's gonna make some of you mad. I think Afro-pessimism is a terrible theoretical position. I want to say that because I just see increasing numbers of young Black scholars who are like, but it's right though. About what? What is it right about? It's
Not
slavery
much.
history is terrible.
Not
The way
good.
that it co-ops all these Black women for its theoretical currency, all of them have disavowed it. Hortense Spillers ain't an Afro-pessimist.
Yep,
Sadia
nope.
Hartman ain't an Afro-pessimist.
Not either. Mm-mm.
Right? None of these women are Afro-pessimists, and yet everyone is like, but things are so bad, right? And so what people are drawn to is the way that it narrates Black abjection. And I was like, or you could just read some 1980s political scientists and sociologists, and they would tell you that racial terrorism was terrible and white supremacy was terrible, right? And so I am saying to you that part of the academic project is about doing the kind of theory production that is politically responsible.
Yeah.
White people get to play games separating theory from practice, right? And saying that they just get to create theoretical frameworks that exist out in the ether, and they don't have to be responsible for the political consequences of what they do. Black folks, and particularly Black women, have always known that that is a fool's errand. That is not what you are here to do. Mary Church Terrell said, this is not the time for pretty words. Right? So you are here to do the reading. And so part of the reason sometimes that you can't go in the community and translate what the stuff means for people to get it is because it's BS. And the minute that you actually start explaining it, doesn't reflect their experience, their understanding. It's not helpful to them, because I promise you that if you're doing the work right, so I will go into panels and communities all the time, and usually I say this thing about being a Black feminist, and an elder Black woman will always walk up to me and be like, I just thought that was for white women, and it's just so interesting to me. Still, right? Young Black women will also say it, which infuriates me. Because I'm like, stop letting white women determine what your political legacy, inheritance, and set of possibilities are, right? That is also a gap, but it is a gap that is born of the fact that people don't read, but not our elders. So I always say to them, I was like, well, where are our marches, ma'am? Like, where are our marches? When stuff happens to Black women, where are the mass marches about it? The only one they can point to is Breonna Taylor. And that was 2020. But we had to fight Black men in Black Lives Matter to have marches for Sandra Bland. We had to build a whole campaign called Say Her Name in 2015 to get people to start naming that Black women were victims of state violence. So when I then say to Black women, yeah, but you do all the work to organize the meeting, put the framework together, do all the writing, and then who be on the mic though? And every time I say it to an elder, they're like, you know what? Yeah. You're right. I was like, correct. And is that liberation, right? So if you say to these, so what do you look like? My last point. What do you look like? Coming to Harvard Divinity School or the Rutgers PhD program or any of the other vaunted places, spending all your time talking about how black people are socially dead? What do you look like telling people in communities being given hell and beaten down by systems that they are the thing that white people say they are? And that is a way that faith informs my context. So I'm like, what do you mean? Is the only epistemology and the only, y'all love ontology. I hate it, but let's say metaphysics, right? Like, let's pick. I was like, why did they give us ontology? It's just a bunch of people putting ontology in these papers and using it wrong. Read black
Let's
feminist
get into it,
philosophers.
yes.
Your theory would be tighter if you would.
Yeah.
But y'all will read these people and then go out into community and be like, yeah, do you go out to the community and look at people and think they socially dead? And then y'all wonder why white people who want to be down with black folks love Afro-pessimism? Because I'm like, well, you concede a fundamental epistemic proposition that we are abject and in need of saving and basically not alive. Lies, right? And if you have any divinity education worth its salt, what do you look? We are people who say, can these dry bones live? And you literally saying the opposite.
Yeah.
Can all of this lively black flesh, it is dead. Bullshit. Right? That is irresponsible use. That is the academics being irresponsible to community and producing the epistemic gaps that get our people killed and that disempower them because you think that your job is to play the academic game and it's not. And so when I stand in my classrooms, the cost of that kind of thinking, though, my students frequently think that I am not don't have the kind of theoretical sophistication that they want for the jobs and the careers that they want. And I was like, but see, the difference is when I leave out of here, I want to be in a basement of a church in Ferguson on Labor Day weekend after Mike Brown has been killed, helping people to come to language that understands their condition. I'm not trying to be here only to audition for the tenure committee. Right? That's not the job. That's not the point of it. And so don't use the labor that black women have put forward to build these institutions and then use it to harm black women. I work in an institution whose entire leadership structure is now black. When I got there 14 years ago, there was not one black person in upper level leadership. Now they're all black. And all they doing is using all that terrible anti-black power to do anti-black things with their black selves. That's all they're doing. They're using the legacy that black women built in these institutions and they're dismantling it and playing in our faces while they do it. But if you are not careful and committed and have integrity in the studying that you do, the institution will give you the cookies for being the same kind of black person.
Just because people will publish it doesn't mean you should write it. Just
Certainly
because
shouldn't say
people will let you say it on camera don't mean you should. Right?
Just
all of us got things that we have learned and studied in our lives that we will never write. And if people are so happy for you to write it, who you vehemently disagree with, rethink it.
And the question for your theoretical proposition is so Sonia Sanchez says, but how do it free us? If at the end of it, if I hypotest the thing you telling me, what are the otherwise possibilities that are made possible because you said this thing? When Kimberly Crenshaw named intersectionality or Fran Bill named double jeopardy, right? Worlds opened up. We suddenly had a language to understand our condition, right? When Kelly Brown Douglas talked about the problem of sexuality in the black church, all of a sudden I remember that book as a person who felt sexually oppressed by the church and sexually suppressed by the church. And I was like, wait a minute, there's a theological framework to name the thing that is happening. So when you see all these people on TikTok and they deconstructing or whatever, right, that's a win for us. Right? But if you don't write the books and have the talks, then the level of their deconstruction is going to be the TikTok level. And you know what that's going to do? It's going to tear everything down. It's not going to build anything. Right?
So
it's not going to put them in a better position to do the thing they're trying to do.
I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly.
All right. I hope you all taking notes.
No. I just want to give an example of how this plays out, and I really hadn't thought about it until I was listening to you just now. People often talk about me being in movement spaces, and that's not just Ferguson. I was in Charlotte. I was in lots of movement spaces. But what you don't know is that it was marching in the day, and in the evening, Far too often I was sitting with some woman as a pastor who had been raped in the very movement, by people who were in the movement, and trying to wrestle with, is my pain and my body worth dismantling this moment? That's what happens in the gaps. That's what happens when you can pronounce one thing and it never comes to life on the ground. Or how can we be marching based on a belief, a faith, that we deserve everything we're asking for because we too are holy, and yet have a whole campaign to keep queer people out, trans people out? Do you understand what I'm saying? There's a gap between the head and the heart, and that gets manifested in the very places that should be safe. Women are not safe, even in movement space. Queer people are not safe, even in movement space. We will go harder at a trans person than we will go at a white supremacist. And these gaps are not theoretical. Right. And sometimes we take a piece of what we get from scholars. Yeah. But if we can't make it live on the ground, it's worthless.
Yeah, that's good.
No, absolutely. And you all touched on so many important pieces in this question of the way that, theories fall to the ground if we're not living them out. The way that Black women's labor, their attention, their strategy, their leadership is undervalued and underused in these movements. So thank you all for all of your insights. I'll move us to one final question before we get to the audience, even though I wish this were a 2-hour panel and we could go through all of, touch on everything that y'all said. So I'm going to try to combine as many questions into one. So taking us low and bringing us right back up high to end here, how can we ensure that movements are truly centering Black women's experience, because they far often do not? And then when we look to the future and we're thinking 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, looking back on this moment, and folks are reading our movements and struggles as theological production, what do we want them to learn? What are we hoping to impart in the next generation? How can we close these gaps, especially for Black women? So I'm going to open this up to all three of you.
I said last night, make men take notes. Stop making women secretaries in charge of logistics. Figure out how to get someplace without a woman telling you where to go next. Then you have already relieved a woman of half the stress of being in a movement, because it turns out that you can function without her. That's what I'm saying. Both, really, I really believe that. But also, I say it to say that you cannot say, I see how many people are trying to get something from you, and then ask them for something right afterwards. I can't tell you how many people have told me, "Oh, you look tired." But also, do you think you can come come on my program 2 weeks from now? If you take Black women seriously, and if you take the loving of Black women seriously, and if you want to see them thrive, you have to treat them like humans. You have to give them grace. I often say, I used to talk to Upward Bound kids a lot when I worked at Rutgers. And the thing that I would say is, the people who are trying the most are the people you punish the most, right? So I was in African American studies. British and I were colleagues, and they would come in there, and if you got their pronoun wrong, they would tell everybody on earth, you are the worst. But they would go to a chemistry class, and the professor never once acknowledged their presence, and they would never say, "I'm human. Do you see me?" right? And so one of the things that I think is really important to center Black women is to actually see them as human beings and to treat them in the same human ways that you get pissed off that you believe they're not treating you. And so if you meet them on the road one day and they are not smiling, don't think, oh, Professor Brown Douglas egged me the other day. She ain't even see me. She was mean mugging me. Professor Brown Douglas got a life. Maybe she was having a bad damn day. You know what I'm saying? But there is a way in which Black women are caught up in so much emotion that isn't theirs. Where I meet people, I've literally been told by students before, you were talking to me like you my mama. And I'm like, but I'm very clear that I'm not your mama. I'm nobody's mama. Not one person. And so that feeling is yours, not mine. Do your own work. And don't make Black women have to constantly accommodate, love you despite the ways you slash and burn them, right? Because Black women are gonna do it. Students are gonna be the worst, and you are still going to try to write them a letter of recommendation. You are still going to try to help them graduate. You are still going to try to do those things. And what I'm saying is, if you want to center Black women, then you be nicer to them.
And that doesn't mean that you don't deserve your pronoun.
Yeah, of course. I'm saying I'm trying. I'm the one who is actually trying to work this out. I am a person who was not raised in this time. I am trying to figure it out. And I get it wrong one time, and you are like, you are the worst. I'm saying everybody is learning. We are learning how to be together. And if you come into the company, not all Black women, some Black women ain't trying to learn, but if you come into the company of Black women who are trying to learn, who are trying to move across generations, who are trying to move across categories, who are trying to do the things that recognize you as human, don't place them with everybody else who didn't. And so give people grace in the same kinds of grace that you expect to have. If it turns out that this is an ignorant Black woman who ain't doing that, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about the ways in which Black women are genuinely putting their health, their finances, and their time on the line for you. And then somebody in the department who is mean as shit, but they do theory, you're like, that's my dissertation committee right there. But as soon as that person who everybody knows is going to stab you in the back does it, you come sitting in my office 2 weeks before you got to defend your dissertation, saying, can you read a whole dissertation, edit it, help me get through it, and then figure out my defense, reconstitute a whole committee, sign all the forms, figure out what all the forms are. Can I say this has happened to me before? You just wandering through the department looking for Black women, and when my door is open, all of a sudden I'm on an education dissertation, which is not my area, but I am now the chair, because anybody could have seen them people didn't have your back. But because I reminded you of your sassy grandma and told you to get out, go cry somewhere else, and then come back and tell me what you want, I'm the enemy. And what I'm saying is, it's that kind of stuff. Do your work around the relationships you have with Black women, so that every Black woman who comes across your path ain't a trigger for you, and you ain't a cause of consternation for them. And that will center movements. Black women will be happier, and they will do exponentially more. Imagine what movements would be like if Black women didn't have to stop for all of that foolishness. We would have fixed these problems if we didn't sometimes have to deal with the tiny, let me use y'all's word, microaggressions of the very people you are trying to serve. And I'm not saying we shouldn't think about white people, but that's not who I'm talking to now. I'm talking to us. In these movements, you could get so much more if you just let Black women sleep and not text them at 3 o'clock in the morning for a mistake everybody saw coming but you. And who told you during the daylight hours, don't do that. Don't do it. Don't send that email. Don't do it. Don't do it. And we said it multiple times, and yet you call me in the middle of the night crying, and I am like, but I'm just sleepy. Do you see what I'm saying? That's how we center them. It's not rocket science, but it's
and then I'll
difficult
let
to
you
do.
close out because I want
Yes.
you to. Yeah, and look, just added to that. So when Black women feel that way about this political moment, right, and they feel this way about 2024, and all my young radical colleagues are like, but what about these genocides? Black women were never saying genocide was okay. They were
Never.
saying that these set of organizing conditions are not the way to end a genocide. That's literally all they were saying, was that you got to have a base level of order, people listening to you, competence, in order to even go to the table to upend and change and shift this decades-long set of policies. And we lived in a world where folks couldn't hear that from Black women. And so what they said was that Black women's inherent pragmatism about a bad set of conditions meant that they were morally retrograde and had no political vision for the future.
Right.
Right? And I'm like, you are living in the futures that pragmatic Black women built for you. Right? That Black women who kept the lights on for you so you could do your homework, and Black women who made sure you got fed, and Black women who made sure there was a school on the corner, Black women who voted for the side that made sure that there was a base level of comfort for you to be able to step into the room and do all your theorizing that low-key hates Black women. That's all I'm telling you. It makes me so angry because I don't support genocide, right? When I stood out at encampments, when I stood with our students, I don't support that, but I supported every sister who understood that this was a terrible set of conditions for us to be. Look at everything we're losing because people couldn't hear Black women say, baby, we've been here before and we don't need to do this again. It wouldn't be the first time. We've already done this before. We don't need to rebuild the house. So now what my days consist of is having to organize with the same people that I was organizing with in that moment while they crying about all the terrible stuff. So now you crying on my shoulder, but you know where you not? In the other set of meetings I have to go to defend all the shit that Black women built that is now being destroyed.
Right.
Right? That was the organizing framework for you to be able to step into the room and do your organizing. But if you don't understand that the foundation and the house we built is the reason you are also in this house, then you will throw us all under the bus and then come crying. I ain't even a hugger, and I had people crying on my shoulder about destruction that I told them was coming.
Yeah.
That is what Black women are angry about. We not having a conversation with y'all about whether we should sit it out or we shouldn't sit it out. What sisters are sitting it out?
None.
We not sitting it out, and that's why we took our few
The ones who were
months
never
of rest,
going anywhere in the
because
first
we knew we
place.
wasn't gonna be able to sit it out because they was gonna be knocking on our door and snatching babies up and destroying stuff and taking programs away and making it harder for kids to get in school, right? Making it hard, like literally, I'm like, how these kids supposed to fund getting in school, right? I'm talking like Pell Grant kids, this kind of stuff, right? How we gonna produce a new generation of you with the things that we have going on? And Black women knew that. So look, the vision for the future is simply understanding, right, that Black women have always been visionary pragmatists, have always assumed that there would be Black people in the future, have always worked for a world where Black people could be better than they currently are in that future. Sometimes all Black women are doing is saying, baby, what I want for you in the future is better than what we have today. And they do that at a micro level. They do that at a level of building. They do that at a level of just trying to make sure you can get beyond where they are. That is, the future. There's much more vaunted things we could say about it. But in the end, if you don't understand Black women's own pragmatism as a future forward thing, people ain't trying to keep the lights on if they don't plan to live to see tomorrow. They're keeping the lights on because they want you to have a space of possibility to build towards something different. And that is what I think, that is what Black women deserve, and that is what it is hard about in this moment. And for all of the training and the sophistication and the decade of movements, Tracy Blackman is one of my movement pastors. My pastor is in the room, but Tracy is one of my movement pastors. And it is my movement pastors who helped me to bridge the gap between the theology that I grew up with and the politics I had, and helped me to understand that part of what it meant to follow Jesus. Tracy's the person who helped me to understand Jesus in the streets and Jesus with the people. Ferguson was transformative in that way. And that that kind of work requires you to have integrity about the thing that you are doing here. And if you don't, then you are not worthy to stand with those people as they facing down cops and they facing down tear gas and they facing down genocides with all of your fancy degrees, and you deserve all the skepticism that you get. But part of the reason they will call us and say, give us money and show up to the protest and negotiate the thing is because they know that we understand that the purpose of the work and the purpose of the future we're building is so that when 10 years from now people come read our language, it is informed by movements. Movements sustain the jobs we have.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You know, that is what future looks like. It looks like understanding the academy doesn't exist without movements, and movements need the assist from the academy if we doing it right in order for those movements to grow at scale.
Exactly, and that is the exact point that we're trying to hone in here. And Reverend Blackman, with the last few minutes we have left, you know, it's all you. Tell us, what do we want the future?
What is the future, Tracy? What is it?
Yeah. Yes, talk to us, Reverend Blackman.
I want to say that it's all movement. It's all movement. Whether you're in the academy, whether you're in the church, whether you're in the streets, it's all movement. And our movements need accountability. You have to have accountability. You need to be able to call one another out. You need to be able to hold our own selves to the principles that we are espousing. You need to have accountability across gender, accountabilities across gender expression, accountability across affectionate expression, accountability across class, accountability across education. Just because you are at Harvard does not mean you know more than the person who is living that experience on the street. There are all kinds of ways to be educated. We need accountability. As it pertains to Black women, don't wait until we die to say our name. It's a wonderful chant, but all the people we chant are dead. So if you know that a woman is leading a movement, come on, Target. Don't act like you don't know that a woman started the movement. If you know that a woman is sitting strategizing for you to get through this moment, don't act like you don't know that the woman was the one strategizing. We need to learn how to be led by women publicly.
Yes.
In our pulpits, and that's no diss to men. I'm simply saying whoever is doing the work and putting forth the vision needs to be recognized as the leader. And women, sometimes we capitulate to that as well. The last thing I want to say about that is that I'm very grateful that this conversation is happening in places like this. And I want to ask you, I know you can't answer me, but I want to ask you, what is your vision for the future? Because if you can't see any further than getting back what we had, if you can't see any further than getting Trump out of office, your vision is too small for this moment. What do you see? My grandmother, Louise Madden Dorsey, finished 6th grade, Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, born on a plantation, didn't even get a name until she was 6. They just called her Blue Eyes. And how you end up with blue eyes on a plantation, we know. My great-grandmother saw something she couldn't articulate. That is the reason I am today. What do you see that's bigger than your degree? That reaches farther than the next election? That is a new way of being and not just a return to what has been. That's what I pray. That's what I pray. And my fear is that all that work that came before allowed us a comfort that has made us too lazy for the fight. Whew. Are you willing to get out of your own way so that we can win this together? Not for the democracy we lost, because it never was a democracy. But how do we have a strategy that stops the bleed while we build what we need? Can you hear that? Can you take this opportunity and not use it to lord over others, but to be with them?
Yes.
Offering what you have and receiving what they have. We will do this. We've been here before. But let's not just aim to get back what we had. You got to see more. Thank you.
Yes, beautiful concluding words. Can we give it up? Can we give it up for these three pioneers?
Good job.
Thank you so much for such an incredible conversation.
For an awesome moderator.
Yeah, I have one over there.
Sponsored by Office of Student Life at Harvard Divinity School.
Copyright 2026, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.